In this tutorial, we're going to be learning about short citations. Short citations are used in order to save space in a memo or any legal document. And this is a great technique to learn because you can make citing to sources so much faster. And so what we're going to cover is Rule 11 of the ALWD manual. And before we begin, I want to tell you an important tip. Don't convert everything into a short citation until you are fully done with editing your memo. The problem is if you end up moving things around and you used short citations, especially when you use id, which is covered in another tutorial, it's difficult to remember where that full citation was referenced in the first place. What case did it belong to? What rule of law did it belong to? So we're going to learn a couple of different ways to do short citations, but keep that tip in mind. So in this tutorial, you'll learn exactly where you can find them in the awkward ALWD citation manual. So here we go.
And under Rule 11, you're going to see here that it goes over again with full citation under 11.1. So for the full citation, that's what we've been learning and using all semester long. Nothing special about that. Now, when it comes to 11.2, this is where the short citation begins. So let me try to make this a little bit bigger. All right, so 11.2 tells you that once a source has been cited in full, the writer may generally use a short citation thereafter to refer to the source. Now, there are times where this is going to be appropriate and other times when it's not. So we're going to cover that in just a second. So depending on where the short citation is going to be located, it'll determine which type of short citation type you're allowed to use. So for example, in 11.3, it talks about id. So id is a short citation that's allowed when we're talking about the identical citation that was previously cited in full. So for it to be an identical citation, it has to be the same case number or the same statute number. All right, so when we're using id, 11.3b tells us that we have to italicize or underline id, including the period. So if you look here, it's a little hard to tell that the dot in italicized is actually italicized, but when it comes here to the underlining, you can tell that the period is underlined, which is different than our case name citations where we don't include the comma at the end. So if the word id begins a citation, then you are going to capitalize the letter I. And if it's not the first word in the citation, then you use a lowercase I. So for example, since we don't have to do footnotes, but this is a good way to see it. So number 19 is a footnote. Id is all by itself, so it's its own sentence. So you're going to capitalize the I. And then the number 20, it's in the middle of a sentence, so you're going to use a lowercase I. So here's an example of when id can be used. So if you look at our example, the full citation comes first. So here we have the case citation for State versus Felix, and it's referencing pinpoint page number 394. So remember, our pinpoint page is where in the case your citation or your thought process is coming from. So the very next one, normally you would have had a full citation here. So if you notice, id is used here instead, but we are changing the page that the pinpoint page shows up on. So if you see here, State versus Felix at page 394 comes first, and then you're going to use id, and you can change the page number as long as we're still referencing the same case. Now, you're going to see in just a minute that if there's a case in between or a statute in between, we cannot use id because something in the it becomes a block. So it's blocking the original citation with the following citation. So here's an example. So citation number 1 is Johnson versus Calvert. Citation number 2 is id. So id is referencing Johnson versus Calvert at the same exact pinpoint page number, which is page 784. Now, right after id, we have citation number 3, which is to a different case number. So it's Railroad versus MH, and the page number is 796. Citation number 4 is id at a different page number. So which case is this id referencing? Well, it's referencing the railroad case. The reason why we know that is id can only be used when we're talking about an immediately previous case. So at no time would this be able to be used to reference Johnson because there's too many things intervening here. Now, the very next citation, citation number 5, is id at page 796. This one is just fine because it's still referencing the main case, which is the railroad case. Now look at citation number 6. It's making reference to Johnson. So this is a different type of short citation. So this is allowed to be used when there's an intervening source in between and you want to make reference to the citation at the very top. So here it's trying to make reference to citation number 1 with a couple of intervening sources in between. So here, this type of citation is allowed when it's not going to confuse the reader. So clearly this is making reference to Johnson, and it's on the same page. So it's safe to say that you can kind of figure out where the Johnson case came from. Now, if I had only id at page 784 here, you would believe that that was coming from the railroad case. So that would be too confusing. So this is a different type of citation that we are allowed to use, which we're going to come back to that. Okay, so just how you saw in that previous example, it can be used even if you're changing the page number or even the statute number. So the way that would be written is under 11.3D, when you're using id followed by a pinpoint reference. So when we're talking about cases, we're going to use the example called page numbers, and that's the id at 321 period. So notice that the id period is the only thing italicized. Everything else is in the normal font. And yes, you can use the underline for id. If we're talking about a Florida statute or a federal statute, you can make reference to id, but to a different section part. So here's the example of that. So you will italicize or underline the id period. There's going to be a space, the section symbol, a space, and then the citation number for the section. And it always ends with a period. All right, so where do we find these short citations? So if you remember in Rule 12 covers cases. So at the very beginning of the rule number, you get your little cheat sheet, fast format, full citation here. So what I want you to do is pay particular attention to all of the different the citation components. So this would be for a full citation. Now, at the back of every rule, you're going to find a section called the short citation format for cases. For example, for Rule 12, Rule 13, they have one for the Constitution. Rule 14 is going to be for statutes. And if you have another type of either a citation for a secondary source, at the end of every rule, you will find a short citation format. So for Rule 12, for cases, you're going to find it in Rule 12.19. So 12.19a says, id is a preferred short citation. Rule 12.19b states that if id is not able to be used because there's a intervening citation of a different source, then you're going to have to use a condensed version of the case citation. So look at all these different parts. So here we have the first single party's name, which will be italicized or underlined, except for that little comma. And then we're going to have a space, and then we're going to have reporter volume, space, the reporter abbreviation, space, the word at, space, and then the pinpoint reference if, and the at and the pinpoint reference are only being used if it's on a different page number. Otherwise, it would have stopped right here. And then please note that there is a period at the very end of that format. So let's see an example about this. So in the example, we have Seal versus Van der Vuur. It's a case out of Utah on page 296 is where our pinpoint reference is referencing. So that's our first citation in our example here. Sorry about that, let me go back. All right, and then our second citation is to a case called State versus Featherson. So that is the intervening source that kind of messes up our ability to use id. So when we make our third citation, which is talking about the case seal, which is our number 1 citation, we can't use id because it's in the way. So we're going to use that short citation format, which is the first party's name, which is seal, underlined or italicized, and then we're going to use the reporter volume, the reporter name, the word at, and then the new pinpoint page number. So what I want you to understand is that we can't use it in this section. Now, what happens when we have a case that starts off with United States or the state of Florida? Well, we can't use Florida, comma, and then the reporter information because we don't know what case that could be. It could be many cases. So like here for State versus Featherson, we're not going to use state. So we're actually going to use Featherson instead to identify that case. So here's another example. The full citation is United States versus Charisse. So we're going to drop the United States, and then we're going to use just the last word, Charisse. So then let's take a look at Rule 14 for statutes. So here we have the full citation, okay, whether it has an official name or not. And then let's look at the end of Rule 14 to look for the one that says short citations. So for statutes, it's going to be a little different, okay? So of course, the preference is to use id, but if id is not appropriate, then we're going to use Rule 14.5b. So here's an example of a full citation. So here's the entire citation for the statute. So the next time I make reference to that same statute, we're going to just drop off the date. The second way to do it is if you want to go ahead and drop more information to save more space, you not only drop off the state, but you're going to drop off the 42 USC. And all of these end with a period. All right, so now for your memo, you don't have to use short citations, but if you do want to use short citations for your final memo, part 4, which is going to be your final draft, you can actually use these short citations. So we've learned about the short citations for cases, which is found at the end of Rule 12, and then you also have Rule 14.5 for statutes. All right, hopefully that helps you guys out, and if not, let me know.